Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co, and today I'm reviewing Wayfarers of the South Tigris from Garfield Games. Wayfarers of the South Tigris is a 1-4 player Euro game in which players are trying to do everything. They're trying to do everything. They're trying to do a lot of things in this game. Now, I'm going to go ahead and dive into this, give you a bit of an overview, tell you my thoughts, opinions, all those usual things. I will not be doing anything close to a full rules teach on this. I think it would just be a little too complicated. But let's take a step back. Let's talk about what you're trying to do in this game. It is a midweight Euro game with a lot of interweaving mechanisms, some degree of confusion, but something that, at least for me, comes together fairly nicely at the end of it. You see, in this game, you're going to have this player board over here with all these cards over here. So that's 5 different sections of cards you can have. Then you have your own individual player area, which you would need a lot more space than the tiny amount I'm giving you over here, because you're going to be placing cards to the left and to the right on all different sides of this board. Now, the reason you're trying to do all this is points. Ultimately, the only thing you care about in this game is points. Like many Euro games, you want points. The question is, how do you get points? What are you trying to do? What's going to reward you? Well, the first thing is every time you see this symbol over here, that symbol means points. And one of the large areas you're going to get points for are going to be sets of cards. You're going to be trying to get sets of cards with different symbols. So for example, if you look at these cards down here, these are some of the 4 core symbols on them, and gathering more of these in larger and larger sets will give you points. You'll get 5 points for every 4 different cards, and you'll get up to 16 points for having 7 of the same symbol. So hunting down those cards and these symbols you can find on them, which you can also sometimes find on various bonus tiles around the edge of the board, you're going to try to get as many of those as possible because points. Additionally though, one of the large areas you're going to be trying to get points from are these cards up here. You're going to want to add these to your tableau, and that's where you start with one already on your board. In fact, you start with some basic bottom cards, you start with this tableau over here, but when you go ahead and you get these, you're going to add them to the top of your tableau, extending your tableau in either direction on the left or the right, as long as you have a card on the bottom. You're going to have these water cards over here on the right over here, and you're going to have these ground cards on the left. The space cards, which give you points for them, have to be supported below them, and once you have those there, they're going to give you different criteria of how you earn points. You have to get the card, and then try to actually fulfill the criteria. So for example, this card over here is 3 points by itself, but if you get the moon, if you get the sun along with it, then each of them are going to be worth 7 points, which is a big jump in points. So you're trying to find these different ways of getting points in the game. That's some degree of how you're going to get points in the game. It is not everything, but it's a big part of it. The last thing I'll cover is some of these cards over here, because we've covered these cards to a small degree. They go to the right of your board, these cards go to the left. What do? We'll come back to that. These cards go on top of your board, and they're going to give you point scoring benefits, and these get tucked underneath them. So for example, if you tuck this underneath that, this gives you the opportunity to double this card. If you have 3 of these symbols, you'll double the points you get from this card. So you want to find these and tuck these under your higher scoring point cards, because that can lead to a big chunk in points if you do it right. And then lastly, we have people. We'll come back to people shortly as we explain what all of these cards do. But now you kind of know what these cards do. They give you ways of doubling it if you fulfill certain criteria. These cards give you points by fulfilling certain criteria. These cards are going to add to your tableau by giving you more ways to place dice. Because we've talked about what you're trying to do, we haven't talked about what you actually looks like when you take a turn. On your turn, you're going to either place a die or place a meeple. Basically, you're going to start by rolling your dice over here. You're going to go ahead and put them into the various columns on your board. And I have a 3, 5, and 6, and I can place those dice for various benefits. We'll talk more exactly how dice placement works shortly, but you can place those dice for various benefits, or you can place one of your meeples. Meeples get placed on cards, and they show you what colors of meeples can be placed. So I can place a yellow meeple over here to take 2 coins and place one of my influence in the yellow area over there. So you're going to be placing your meeples out onto various cards, and you do not get them back. All players will have those yellow and blue meeples. There's also green meeples you can get from the center of the track over here. And when you place them on a card, you don't get them back yourself. Rather, other players can take that card. When they buy that card, they get the meeples on them, which means it is not unusual for a player to have 5 meeples and someone else to have 1 meeple in this game. The dice are going to be your core placement though. Those are yours. Those are your colors. You can roll those dice, you can assign them, and then when you have nothing else to do, or you just want to, you can take a refresh turn where you pull back your dice, re-roll them, which gives you new values, and also clears up the various spots you've been placing your dice. Placing those dice on those spots are the core of how you do all these things in the game, because you're going to be trying to get everything. You're going to be trying to get resources in the game. You want to get your provisions, and you want to get your coins, because those are essential to buy the various cards you need in the game. Remember, I talked about the fact you need cards, and you need these scoring cards over here, and you're going to need various benefits as far as moving along this track, which I haven't actually talked about yet. But you're going to want all those things. You're going to need provisions. You're going to need coins. Very often, even though these cards don't inherently cost anything, trying to get those cards often cost provisions. Going down here, which will give you a yellow card, or going down here, which gives you a blue card, those cost provisions. So you always need money and provisions. So you're constantly trying to be mindful of how to spend your money, how to place your dice so they give you the best possible return to get you these cards, and these cards give you things that will give you other benefits. They give you new worker placement spots where you can place dice over here. They give you perks that whenever you do something, you get something else. They give you one-time benefits, get 2 coins and pull back a die. So you're gonna get a bunch of perks from these cards, and people make your cards better. These people get tucked under matching cards, and they make whatever bonus you get from that better. So maybe that worker placement spot that you place the die over here, if you tuck this card underneath that, instead, you're going to also get that symbol, which inherently powers that card. Sometimes these symbols on the dice means you need to have that symbol, and you can get it either from your caravan, which I'm not going to go into how exactly it works, a lot of rules going on here, or you can get it by powering up a card with a card below it. And so people basically give you more flexibility, or just give you a return backwards when you take actions with your dice. And then past that, the last thing I'll cover before I do a bit of a recap is this center board. The center board is what triggers game end, because you're going to have your token over here, and when you get it all the way to the end, in this column over here, it's going to trigger game end. The way you get it there is whenever you see an ink blot action, which is over here, but also happens when you refresh your dice if you have 0 or 1 dice left, then you get to go ahead and move your token along this track. By moving the token along the track, the first time you do it, it's pretty easy. Just go ahead and move your token. Done. Well, I'm red. Let's do red over here. Go ahead and move it. Take that. Boom. You get this green worker, which you can place, and someone else might get it later. But then as you go further along the track, you have certain criteria. Look, I have to have 2 of that symbol. Then I can move here, take one of these cards, and also go ahead and get one of my extra dice. You're going to be able to add more dice, so you start with 3, but you can go up to 5. But then moving over here, you need some of these options over here. So as you're moving along these pathways, you're getting benefits, but you also have certain criteria of things you need to fulfill in order to progress. And when you finally get to the very end of the track, when you finally get here, that triggers game end. So, brief recap, again, rules light. This is kind of an overview more so than any form of teach. But in the game, you're trying to get points. You'll often get points from cards. Cards are going to be the biggest source of points in the game. You're going to want these cards because the symbols will help you and they help you in game. You want these cards to give you points, and you want these cards because they double the points you get from these cards. These cards, meanwhile, will enhance the benefits you get from the in-game cards over here. Meanwhile, you're trying to move along the center track over here to get the benefits along the way. Sometimes it's a bit of a race to move along the track to be able to trigger a game end on your terms. Other times, it's about getting the various benefits, and other times you don't care about the center because your engine is working just fine for you, and you're not concerned when someone else ends the game because you have too many points for you to worry about something as silly as all that. And that is basically how you play Wayfarers, with skipping a lot of these small nuanced rules. There's a whole bunch of things I did not get into. This is a complicated game in very many forms. I'm trying to give you a general sense of the gameplay as opposed to anything else. But with that, let's go ahead and dive into my review, starting off with, well, let's start with ease of play, because the ease of play on this one is not the best. This is a confusing game to teach. It is not immediately intuitive. It comes together nicely, but it often does take a bunch of actions to understand how, like a few rounds of play it'll take before you even really understand how things work. Well, so I'm placing a person over here. Does that give me the card? No, that takes the action over here. How did I get the card? Well, you go over here. That gives me the card? Yeah, that gives you the card. What about the person? Well, now you have the person. Well, what about if I put my influence on a card? Well, now you're going to benefit whenever someone else interacts with the card. There's a million small little things going on, and some things that get in the way of the teach, including things as simple as the card colors. Why are these yellow cards? When you go here, you get a yellow card. That's these. When you go here, you get a blue card. That's these. When you got a green card, you're trying to get them from over here. At least I'm pretty sure these are the green cards. And these are the black cards. Why? Well, these are black on the back, and this has a small patch of green, a small patch of yellow, and a small patch of blue. So I guess that makes them green, yellow, and blue. There are small things that get in the way of the teach that make it not the most intuitive. Some of the symbology, even though the back of the rulebook has a great symbology reference on it for the most part, there are still things that are not always immediately clear. This card over here, does that mean you have to have 2 of green and black, or 2 of green and 2 of black, or 2 of black and 1 green? That could be a few different ways on the card, and it's not always immediately clear, and they don't always have symbology for all of the things you're looking for. So overall, the game works well and comes together well. I do find it is a non-intuitive teach and a slightly harder teach to get the game going. Past that, game time comes down to around, I want to say, 30 to 45 minutes per player, depending on the how often you've played the game, the player count to an extent. But it does move quickly as players take one action, cycle around, one action. If you're on top of your turns, it does move quickly. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking, starting off with what I like, which is there's a tons of things to do in this game and ways to achieve them. Now, the core premise of getting cards, you're kind of stuck in that. If you don't get cards, you won't score points. This game is about gathering cards, but it's about finding those efficiencies of how can I gather cards slightly better than you? How can I find these cards that combo together in a way that complements what I'm doing down here, and over here, and over here? How can I find everything that complements itself? And because of the fact that you're dealing with giant decks of cards, I mean, giant is a relative term, but we have 5 different decks of cards. 4 of them are fairly large, giving you a lot of variability to what these things do, and the way you gather certain cards together and combo them off, the way you power up your cards with people by sliding them underneath them, everything in this game gives you a slight way to find your competitive advantage in the game, and there are so many veins to go down as far as what you're trying to do. You can try to just build out your card pools left, right, and center. You can try to focus on getting as many of these point scoring cards as possible. You can try to focus on getting 1 or 2 of these and going hard into them and getting the right multipliers on them and moving up these tracks. There are a lot of different ways you can try to push that endgame and push your own positioning within that endgame. The combination of dice placement and meeple placement gives you a degree of flexibility in the game. Dice placement is the core puzzle. You'll be placing dice onto the board, onto your own private boards and on your own cards in order to trigger your actions and drive your engine forward. But whenever you feel stuck, those workers are bread and butter to feeling stuck in this game. Very often in the game, you will feel like you don't have the resources you need, but guess what? I have a worker, so I'll go over here and get 2 provisions if I need to. There's always flexibility on the spots around the edge of the board. And knowing when to hold on to those workers, knowing when to cash them in to get the benefit, that is a big part of the experience of I like the combination of your core engine and then the things that get you out of trouble, which is what those meeples are, but they also make other things tempting for other people because then they want to go ahead and gather those cards because now they have the thing that gets them out of trouble in the game. And the pathways in the game that you're trying to advance on over here, you're going to be constantly trying to move up this track, but you also don't need to focus on that, and I like that. The first time I played Wayfarers, the only thing I focused on is how can I aggressively move up this track as fast as I possibly could. I lost that game. The second time I played Wayfarers, I kind of ignored the track and only ever moved with the track when I had to because I was anyways refreshing my dice and I just, I had a free movement. And that game was totally different and I won that game. Does that mean that the way to win the Wayfarers is not to move with the track? I don't think so, not based off multiple plays, but the idea that the track is something that is there, it's present, it enables your engine, but it's not the core thing to focus on. This is not a race game in and of itself. There's a timer on the game because of refreshing and there's a natural evolution and cycle up the tracks, and there are sometimes early rewards to being the first person up the track. You'll get certain benefits that you won't get if you're not the first person, but ultimately the track is part of what you're trying to do in the game and not everything. And there's tons of small different ways to improve upon your tableau. Those people are a big thing. You're going to be gathering people and subbing up your, not subbing, but improving the action cards you have. You can have all these tiles we really talk about, but these tiles over here all go into your caravan chart over here and make your dice better or give you discounts or give you more flexibility, and you're constantly trying to get that up and running. You're giving yourself more actions and you're augmenting those actions. You're giving yourself ways to score points. There's just a lot of things that all interweave nicely in this game, and the entire puzzle is incredibly satisfying to build out a rewarding tableau of 15 different cards that all complement each other nicely and give you something to focus on as you go through it. This is a game that definitely rewards repeated plays by giving you a better, greater understanding of how things work together. As your first game, to a certain extent, is a learning game because you're learning how things operate, and then by the time you get to the end, you're like, oh, now I kind of understand the scoring. So your first game is very much a learning game, but this is a game that will reward repeated plays and will be a very enjoyable, or can be a very enjoyable experience as everything comes together nicely. As far as things I don't like in the game, the first thing I'll say is that to a certain extent, as much as I appreciate repeated plays of Wayfarers because it gives you more of an understanding of what's going on, to a small extent the game's just focused on getting cards. You're getting cards, and sometimes the things you're doing feel a little samey. At the end of the day, having one action versus another, proxying up this action over that, well, that's actually very different over here. I have to find ones over here, but these actions over here are similar with different colors. They all give you, there's a degree of ways to make yourself feel different and special in this game, but a lot of it will feel a little bit samey game to game. So it's not a big deal by any means because there's so much nuance in what's happening as things pair up together. But the core engine of what you're doing, of placing dice, of gathering cards, the core engine will feel a drop repetitive. They give you ways to tweak how you approach it because of the abilities or the types of cards you go for, but there's a small degree of sameness to the experience. Very small degree, overall very different. I'll also say, and this is a nitpick, I don't like the sun-moon card situation. I don't like how the sun-moon card situation is basically 3 points for a card, but it's 7 points instead if you get that one sun. And to be clear, there's only one sun and one moon in the entire deck of cards, which means you're kind of gambling on, hey, I might get 3 points to this card, or I might get 7. If I have both of them, I get 14. If I double them, that could be 28 points, or it could be 6 points if you double both those cards. And so that one particular card is such a large swing in points if you do manage to get both the sun and the moon versus if you don't, that it feels like sometimes the person who goes for the sun or the moon can have their entire game decided based on getting that one card combo. So that's a specific, very, very specific nitpick of the game that I don't like that card combination because it encourages going for broke or going home. I'll also say the game drags a bit at 4 players. For me, 2 and 3 players is the sweet spot. 3 players gives you more, things happening at the table, more players interacting, and 2 is a faster game, but at the cost of that 3-player dynamic. 4 to me is just a player count I would prefer not to play this game at again. Turns do move fast, but to me the 4th player adds nothing. To a large extent, this is multiplayer solitaire, which brings me to my last complaint, my last area, what I can see others not liking, which is to a large extent this is multiplayer solitaire. You're doing your own thing, you're focusing your own engine, sure you're vying for cards and there's some degree of placing a thing out and taking it, but there's not a ton of interaction. You're doing your own thing for the most part with a degree of intermingling on the main board. I've definitely played worse games of multiplayer solitaire, but if you're looking for a high interaction game, I don't think this is it. Additionally, the game is complicated. I told you that already doing the accessibility aspect. There's a lot going on here. And a lot of it is not always intuitive, as the symbology, the deck colors, all of that stuff. And it's really hard to get a feel for the scoring until you're done your entire first game. I think the entire first game of Wayfarers is kind of a learning game. I think that's what it is. I think it's a learning game, and you got to write that off as understanding how to play and how to score, and then you dive back in for game 2, which will actually give you the experience you're looking for. I'll also say you have to plan ahead in this game. This is a game where as you move up this track, if you're not mindful of planning ahead, you can find yourself stuck. And that's not a problem when you're playing this game for the second or third time, but you're playing this game for the first time to just try to understand and move forward, and then suddenly 3 turns from now, you're like, well, I never planned around those symbols, and I never got them, and so now I'm just frustrated and stuck in my first game. So it's more of a critique to the first game aspect, because you don't want to have to understand everything to play, but because of the planning ahead aspect, you might get stuck if you don't. And then lastly, I'll say it is a game where if you fall behind early on, it is a little easy to see that other players are winning, are getting all the points they need, while you're desperately trying to catch up. You could be stuck playing for 45 minutes, knowing full well that you're not even in the match. Which is a whole bunch of things that I can see others not liking. For me, really, there's not quite as much, which I guess brings me to final thoughts, which is I love this game. I love Wayfarers. I think it's incredibly well done. I love the intricacies of the ways things combo together. I love the variability of the ways you'll build out your systems because of the sheer amount of cards in this game. To me, Wayfarers really scratches the type of itch I like in gaming. Tableau building with a rule set that gives you what you're trying to do, and then cards that mix up how I approach it every single game. For me, Garfield games have not always landed as heavily as they have with the general audience. They have a lot of great games that are very well received, and for me, I've usually enjoyed them without loving them quite as much. But for me, Wayfarers is fantastic. I think that the amount of things you have going on in this game, the amount of decisions you are making in this game, the amount of ways things come together as you try to pursue different pathways, but trying to ultimately gather cards and just find the best way the cards combine. It's an incredibly satisfying experience that for me, it's a 4.5 out of 5. I really enjoy and strongly recommend Wayfarers of the South Tigris. If you're looking for other game recommendations, I'll have 2 that are fairly different. First of all, if you enjoy the track aspect of Wayfarers, it's actually a little similar and reminiscent of Lost Ruins of Arnak. They're very different games in the ways they feel, and Lost Ruins of Arnak is definitely a lighter experience, while still not being a light experience by any means. But that track aspect of having a core track that is a big part of the game, but not at all the entire game, they very much share that similarity in the games. And they have some rewards if you get there first, but you also don't need to. You could choose how and where you want to engage on that central track. That's going to be similar to Lost Ruins of Arnak. And if you're looking for another game that's going to be very focused on giving you a core Euro system, and then a bunch of cards that it comes down to how you use those cards that will drive your efficiencies forward in the game, I highly recommend Evenfall as a game that I've had a chance to try, and I'm looking forward to playing that one more. But Evenfall very much had the same feeling of just having a ton of cards that augment a system, and it's about the way you combine the cards that's going to drive you forward in the game. In any case, then until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you found this video helpful, and as always, I hope you have a good one.